Member for Macon. The question is the bill be now read a second time. To call the member for Herbert.
Thank you very much, Deputy Speaker. Speaker, this is the second time this bill has been before the House. The Coalition has made it abundantly clear that we believe in the higher education sector requires major reforms to keep that sector vibrant and competitive. Those are the two words, vibrant and competitive. Education funding is increasing by 9%, 9% and 9% and 6% over the next over the 4 years of the estimates. To secure that reform, we have further consulted with senators to provide a new bill. This bill keeps the intent of the first bill, but with some changes negotiated with the senators. We have worked with Senator Day to keep the indexation rate for student debt at the CPI as opposed to the previously suggested 10-year bond rate. Senator Madigan wanted to pause and HECS indexation for new parents with children under 5 years of age. We will introduce a structural adjustment fund to assist our universities, particularly those in regional areas such as my university, James Cook University in Townsville, to assist with the transition to a more competitive market. But, and this is a big but, the sector needs reform if it is to be a player in the future of education in this country and around the world. The university sectors get that. The vet sector gets that. They understand it and they want the reform. It would seem that the only ones not interested in this debate are Labor and the Greens. For instance, Vice-Chancellor of the La Trobe University said when this reform was first put to the House and the university sector, it is no small achievement when an often divided and fractured sector unites around a major change. So it is with this bill. The university sector, with the exception of the University of Canberra, recognise the need for reform and the value of these reforms to their sector. Now, Labor keeps trotting out their tired, hackneyed talking points saying that this is a budget bill and not an education bill. My answer to that assertion is that every bill in this place is a budget bill. Nothing is for free. We must pay for it. And that's the difference between the two sides. We understand that something's got to be paid for. When the Hawke and Keating governments introduced HECS, which seems to have been glossed over by those opposite, it was also a budget bill. Paul Keating understood that things needed to be paid for out of the budget. Look, Liberal Senator Bill Teague led our response to the package of bills which included HECS in a major change to higher education, which, incidentally, in 1989 was not taken to an election either. This was what the then Senator Teague said, and I quote, "We in the opposition are opposed to the graduate tax, but we will be supporting the higher education contribution scheme in this legislation for several reasons. First, it is a budget bill and we respect the ability of an elected government in the House of Representatives to determine a budget and its financial provisions for higher education." End quote. Deputy Speaker, that is what a responsible opposition does. It respects the government's right to set its budget. We wouldn't be having this argument today if it wasn't for the complete and utter lack of transition and the complete negativity of those opposite and in the Senate. Most of Labor's speeches throughout this seem to hark back to the days of Whitlam and free education. We've just seen the member for Macon saying it's unfair that people should have to pay for their educations. Where they should be focused, of course, is on the Hawke-Keating government who brought in HECS in 1989, again without taking it to an election. The Coalition did not make it easy for them to pass legislation in this chamber, but Labor had the numbers in this chamber, on this floor, and it was passed. And so it passed the Senate. Today we see the obstructionist approach by the arch-populist Labor Party, who would rather spin than govern, who would rather obfuscate than participate, who would rather sit on the sidelines and carp than get in a game and have a go. And what have they become? They've become a vacuum of policy and a repository of negativity never before seen in this place. Their sanctimony knows no bounds. We hear every member opposite praise the performance in government and keeps trotting out lines about universities under Labor increasing funds to the sector. What their talking points do not roll out is what they took from higher education. Just let me run through a couple here. 2013-14 budget. Efficiency dividend of 2% in 2014 and 1.25% in 2015, applying to most grants to universities of $902 million cut. Removal of the 10% HECS help discount and the 5% help payments bonus from January 1, 2014, $276 $0.7 million, cut. Conversion to the student start-up scholarships and to student loans, $1.182.5 billion, cut from higher education. A cap on tax deductibility of self-education expenses, which did not proceed because we stopped at a $514.3 million. They cut that all the way through here. 2012, 2012-13 MyEFO. The bloke sitting at the dispatch box knows all about those things here. General interest charge to student loan debt, $7.5 million. Sustainable research excellence, sustainable growth, changes to the rate of funding, sustainable research excellence program, $563.7 million cut from the sector. Concession of facilitation funding, conditional funding to encourage universities to agree to the inclusion of performance targets in their mission-based compacts, $384.6 million cut. All right, so 2011-2012 MyEFO, reinstate Band 2 student contributions for mathematics, statistics and science units for new students, $1,030.9 million cut from higher education. Reduction of help from HECS help discount and voluntary payment bonus in 2011-2012, $607.7 million cut from higher education. A total of $6.6552 billion cut from higher education. None of these things was ever taken to an election. Not one. So all this furphy about things having to be taken to an election. Governments are elected to govern. Was the response to the GFC taken to an election? No, it was not. They needed to act because the circumstances changed, and so they got in and they acted. Right now, we respect that. We respect that. So when the budget comes in, when we came into government, the circumstances had changed, so we acted. None of these things were taken to election. None of these cuts to higher education were education bills. They were all budget bills. Yet Labor sees our attempt at genuine reform in this vital sector as an opportunity for populist nirvana to hark back to the Whitlam era of free education, and their comments seem to be completely miss the fact that they introduced HECS without taking it to an election. None of their speeches list the changes they made to higher education sector, but that seems to be okay. It's the beauty of opposition. It's the beauty of opposition that none of these people opposite have said what they will do if we get the reforms through. What they want to say is, if we get these reforms through, they will reverse them when they come back to government, if they come back to government. We said that with the carbon tax. We also followed through and we did it. Not one person over there has said if we get these things through, that they will reverse it, and I call on them to do so. So why reform? Deputy Speaker, I was lucky enough to be in the chamber when the member for Pearce, now Parliamentary Secretary to the Prime Minister Christian Porter, spoke on this matter. In that very fine address, he added this line from the Vice-Chancellor of La Trobe, where he said, in relation to the importance of these reforms, and I quote, "At stake is whether a viable education system can endure." End quote. At this stage, I'd like to continue to quote from Member Pearce's speech from October 28 last year, where he said what the Whitlam government did was a valid social experiment, and I quote, "The valid social experiment was this. Could the removal of fees result in a higher percentage of low-income students accessing a university education? That was a worthy question of valid social engineering exercise. The experiment was conducted for decades in an environment where the Australian tertiary sector existed in a global market that was relatively stable." End quote. Today's global market for higher education is not stable. It is changing very quickly and very aggressively. He went on to suggest, Deputy Speaker, that when HECS was introduced in 1989 and further, when those HECS fees were increased by almost 800% by the Keating and Howard governments, participation in higher education continued to grow. Again, as the member for Pearce opined, quote, "Does introducing deferred fees for students decrease the percentage of low-income students? No, it does not. Once introduced, does expanding the share of the fees that students are required to fund decrease the percentage of low-income students? No, it does not. Are fees the primary or even substantial determinant of the percentage of low-income students? No, they are not." End quote. But don't take Christian Porter's word for it. Universities Australia came out last year and called for the Parliament to support this deregulation of Australian universities. They still support this. They are the peak body in this sector, and their opinions should have some form of effect on the ALP. They said at the time The introduction, and I quote, "The introduction into Parliament of the federal government's higher education legislation is a chance for all parliamentarians to seize the opportunity for making real, lasting changes that are needed in positioning our universities for the challenges of the future." End quote. This still no movement from those opposite. Professor Ian Young said last year that higher education in this country is at a crossroads. It is time, he said, for us to make choices about whether we want our country, what we want for our country and what we want for our future generations. He said at the time, he said the time was now to make choices about the future of our universities. In Minister Pyne's second reading speech last year, he said, and I quote again, "Currently, our universities are at risk of being left behind and overtaken by growing university systems in our region and across the globe as these systems increase their capacity and new forms of online and blended delivery take hold. We must aspire to not only keep up with our competitors, but to keep ahead of them." End quote. I have two daughters, Deputy Speaker, who attend university. When we brought these reforms to the budget, I did two things. First, I asked my daughters if the cost of their course would affect their decision to continue higher education. Neither said it would. Both said that the cost of the course was unknown to them because they wanted the job at the end of it. The cost of the course did not matter to them at all. HECS was just a way to get the degree and a better job, and the job they wanted. Both have since changed courses, by the way. As I said in my speech on September 2 last year, the day after the budget was handed down and this policy announced, most members of my staff went to James Cook University where we surveyed 140 people, students. I acknowledge that this is not a scientific survey and that I am not a market researcher, but the results are pretty telling. 70% of those people 70% of the people asked had no idea how much their course would cost them in HECS. 20% had some idea and 10% knew exactly. So on this side of the chamber, we are talking about the future of higher education. On that side of the chamber, they're talking about Gough Whitlam. Yeah, you guys are ready to govern. Additionally, this bill will provide access to HECS-style assistance for the vocational education training students. It removes the punitive loan fee of 20% for VET fee help. This will assist tens of thousands of Australian students undertaking VET courses, and it gets rid of the 25% loan fee for fee help for those students who study with private institutions. It also removes the lifetime limits of all higher education loan programs or help schemes and discontinues the ineffective HECS help benefit. So we are offering a system which will see our tertiary education sector remain at the forefront of international education of the future. We're offering a system where not one student will have to borrow a cent up front. We are offering a system where not 1 cent will have to be paid until they earn $53,000 per annum. We are offering a better than world-class opportunity to every student in the country. What are the people across the chamber offering? Absolutely nothing. Say it again. They are stuck with their Green mates, either actively knocking things down, destroying jobs, or just saying no because they have fallen victim to the partisan populist politics. They are devoid of all ideas. They are nowhere. Deputy Speaker, this bill will strengthen the university sector to weather a storm coming from an aggressive and ultra-competitive overseas universities. We must address these issues and we must act now. I'm proud to be part of a government which wants to do more than just throw money out the window as we drive along the road, hoping that some of it will be spent wisely. Labor's assertion that this is a budget bill and not an education bill tells me all I need to know about the opposition and why they are unfit to govern. They honestly think that things can be for free, that things don't cost. And I have news for you. Nothing is free. It all costs. And the bills for our expenditure must be paid. I stand shoulder to shoulder with my Minister, Christopher Pyne, in his quest to see our country prepare for a glorious future and not live in a distant past. I thank the House.
I thank the member for Herbert. Question